you should have it on the tables as well. If you're using a tablet or a laptop, please go ahead and put that into your browser, and it'll just ask you for your name and email. Don't worry, everything you submit is anonymous. Or you can scan this code if you are using your cellular device. And if you're having issues with that, I will come around.
Should be okay now. Okay, that's all. Yeah.
Any technical issues on logging in? Everyone good?
All right.
This is the right screen?
Yeah, it's the right screen, yeah. If you see the QR code, you're in the right screen. Just want to make sure they're on the 11:30.
Yes, you do.
All right, everyone, let's dive in. A quick hello to all of you. My name is Joe. I'm part of the partners here at Beyond. We're going to dive into our session now. I'm going to start by introducing you to Karen Cook. Karen's going to do a quick intro because you're one of our ambassadors.
Yes.
Go right ahead. Tell us a little about yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Cook. I'm from the University of Kansas. I actually am interested in this topic because I started out as an academic advisor before I moved over into student information systems and started working with our advising technologies. So really kind of finding the gaps in student services is sort of where I'm coming from. So very nice to be here. Thank you all.
All right, so today's topic for discussion is this new traditional student. We'll unpack that together here in a minute. But just to set the stage, these sessions are designed, how many of you have done one with us online already? Any of you done an online one? Okay, so you're all doing live. This process is designed to be fairly interactive in that you're going to be talking quite a bit here shortly. You'll end up talking with your fingers because this ThinkSpace system will take some of your inputs directly. Once you're logged in, everything you're going to put in as feedback or insight is all anonymous. So you can be as honest and brutal as you want. And then you'll have an opportunity to see each other's responses and vote them up and share insight and bubble them up. So you'll see how that collaborative process works. But we're going to take you through about 5 discussion questions where the discussion will get richer as we go. But be ready to unpack that a little bit. So as you see stuff fly up on the screen and on your screens, we'll also ask you to share some thoughts and ideas you may have. All right?
Yes, and I also just wanted to add, XSleep can be a little finicky on mobile devices. So if you do have a tablet or a laptop, please use that. XSleep is a lot kinder on those devices.
We're going to dive right into our first question, just to show you a quick tutorial on how this works. When it's just running slow. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little blue button, that little blue icon right here with the plus sign. That's where you click, it'll open up a little chat window where you can put your answers in. So the first question we're going to start with is, so there's this, if you think back in higher ed, if you think back maybe 5 or even 8 years ago, if we were to ask ourselves, what does a traditional student look like? You'd have a definition. You may have a handful of personas in mind, right? Things have changed, and I think we're about to discover together, hopefully right now, that there's these new creatures entering your campuses that don't look, act, talk, or behave like the creatures of before. So, as you think about the student personas of today that are walking the campuses, start to tell us a little bit about these personas. Let's start unpacking them together. I'll give you a couple of examples. One would be a single mom with 2 part-time jobs. She may not have walked on most campuses 10 years ago, but she's on a lot of campuses now. Or here's a very popular one, an 18-year-old gamer who's never even met their friends because they've been online for the last 5 years. They're spread all over the country, they're buddies. Because we're going to start talking about the expectations some of these non-traditional students will have with us. So here we go, part-time students. Yep, 18 to 20-year-old with high anxiety. That's a post-pandemic outcome, isn't it? Yep, keep it going. And now what you'll notice is as you look on your screen, you'll see not only your response, but obviously the response of the people here. You'll see that there's a little green sticky dot, we call them, sitting right up here waiting for you. So as you look at some of the answers your peers are putting on here, if you kind of go, oh, I resonate with that, I agree with that, just click on the 10 and just start to drag it over to the response you like. It's your way of voting up a response. And as you drag, it'll place it there. Someone's already done that. So go ahead and keep doing that. And as you look down the list, if one of the personas identified there is new, and what I mean by that is, this is, especially on your campus, this is a new being that we may have to design some strategy around. Go ahead and drag the yellow new persona on top of it. Because those are the ones we really want to hone in on today, is what does this new traditional student look like? We're going to unpack that together. Go ahead and do that. Karen, as you look down that list, and Gabrielle will scroll it for us a little bit, anything jump out at you there? Of maybe at your campus, what you're seeing?
So I think one of the big ones is the working professional, that traditionally have been community college, perhaps, oriented or bound, and now at a four-year research institution, we're starting to see a little bit more of that.
How interesting.
And I think we're wanting that too.
Oh, I would assume so.
Yeah, for sure.
You want that lifelong learning. So we'll talk a little bit about what some of their expectations are compared to that 18-year-old who's also entering campus this fall. As some of you look down that list, do any of the personas jump out at you as, wow, so a lot of these are new. A lot of you are sensing that some of these are new. The adult learner seeking non-credit, career training. Gabrielle, I'm going to sort while you chat with them a little bit and on some of the insights you're going to have.
Yeah, I'm actually really curious about whoever upvoted on the student who took a gap year. That's like for me, that's I think the first time I've actually ever thought about that. What might be different about that particular student?
Gap years. I didn't put that one in, but it's the student who took a gap year that it becomes gap years.
Okay. So how might how might that persona be different than like just a student coming in straight from high school?
They might not want to come back. They're afraid to come back, right? Because they might not have been successful. So they started their freshman year, weren't successful, took a gap year, afraid to come back because they have all the anxiety from the bad first year experience.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing.
So I put that one in there because I've seen that there are different aspects of taking a gap year. There may be students who just don't know what they're doing and they want to take some time to either go explore, take a credit course somewhere else at another college and then try to come back. Maybe they were trying to increase their scores. There's so many variety of reasons, but one of the aspects that we might want to think about is that they may just feel disconnected also from a campus after taking a gap year. So just something to think about when we're talking about this persona. Yeah, thanks.
And we do have people joining us online on LinkedIn Live. So if you're online with us, you're welcome to log right into the platform and start putting your insight here. So some of the stuff you're seeing here is from people in this room, and some of them are somewhere spread across the country remotely for us. I'm going to move us to the next question because it plays off of this, but take a quick scan of those personas because the next question we want to ask is, what are some of the challenges these students face today? And as you go through, we'll come back around and start assigning some values to it, but just start thinking about what are the challenges And when you think about it all the way starting from the recruitment part of their journey, all the way through completion and all the steps in between. Where do you see some challenges in their student journey today?
Also, if you see responses that that you see as being important, please go ahead and use your sticky to upvote.
And then we'll come back around, I'll explain these colorful stickies to you here in a minute, but for now, focus on the green ones just to upvote the ideas you see are very true for your campus, not just, yeah. Some great ones here. Student services hours, services not available in person. Some of these you'll notice will kind of play off of each other. Balancing work, school, and caring for dependents. This may inspire some new ideas from you. As you look at some of each other's responses, if you see something there that's tied to policy, go ahead and drag the policy yellow dot over. If it has to do with a procedural impact on your student journey, drag that over. Is it a system? Is it a technology encumbrance or challenge that the student's facing? Or is it a cultural one? Go ahead and start dragging those over, because sometimes in dragging those over, you may come up with some new obstacles in your mind. Going, oh, I didn't think of the policy ones. Gosh, there's a ton of policy issues we put in their way. Then feel free to just add some additional ones. I'll give you some time to do that.
Yeah, it seems like we have a lot of, seems like we have quite a few stickies for our number 4, services not available in person. It looks like we have policy, procedures, system, and culture votes for those. Is there anybody who would like to share their thoughts on that one? Services not available in person?
Can I ask a quick question about that? I was wanting just clarification. So services that are available online and in other ways, and you cannot access them on campus? Or is that what the intention behind that is?
Well, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, whoever posted that or voted for it, pre-pandemic, there were a lot of services available in person. I walk up to a counter, I go see my advisor, I go do whatever I have to do. As some of those have moved off to more of a virtual experience or not even available, that may be part of what we're talking about here.
I think also a lot of them, you know how we went online, so we were more accessible, but now a lot of us are trying to come back on campus, so some of those services are only available when staff is working. So if we have a set schedule, students that come in for our night classes, evening classes, they don't have anybody to talk to that can help them going through their financial aid stuff. If they're working 8 to 5 and the campus is only open 8 to 5, there's nobody there to assist them with any of the questions that they have. So that's what I mean.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
We had a session with our campus counselor a couple months ago, and one of the things she said is that sometimes the remote virtual is actually helping more students get help.
Yeah. See, that's an interesting insight because of the new persona, right? If the pandemic had been 15 years ago, we probably would have had a lot of people struggling, maybe 20 years ago, to take advantage of all these virtual services, let alone us having access to virtual services, right? So yeah, part of what you may be discovering in your schools is pandemic forced us online, forced us off campus. How much really needs to come back on campus? One of the things Matt, our founder, talks about a lot with schools is, hey, what does the future of the campus enterprise look like? Is it really 4,000 employees sitting in cubicles? And do they really need to be there, or where does remote work fit in? Where does automation fit in? So that the humans are doing the more human-centric work versus stuff that computers can do today. So, should I sort this for all of us? Let's sort based on highest rated ones. Just scroll down a little bit, Gabrielle. The other way. So the pandemic, student services hours, feeling part of the campus community are the ones that bubbled up the most. Let's look at what issues are impacted by policy and procedure. Let's look at policy for a second. Services not available in person, you're identifying there's policy issues related to it, there are procedure issues related to it, and system related issues for that. Karen, in your role, what are you seeing specific to the office that you're involved in? And you think of the tradition, this new student who's used to an Apple, Netflix, Amazon, Uber world, then they come to our campuses and we're not quite there yet. What are some of the, are you seeing some of these challenges, or are there other ones that you're seeing?
So I think the big, for student services, I work specifically with degree audit, and it's become a really big challenge actually for students who are transferring in work or needing to understand requirements, why they would want to come to our institution versus another, because you really need to be able to understand what you need to do to finish your degree. So that's been something that just in my office and advisors as well, but from a technical side, how do we get that information out there? And I really like this idea of this is something where it's not dependent on meeting with somebody in person necessarily. You can access it perhaps through another platform, right? And not the catalog, because it's not the most friendly thing ever. So that's what I noticed.
Great. Anyone else have any thoughts on that particular, as far as what you're having conversations about at your campuses as the big issues, the big challenges, as it relates to this new generation of students that are coming on board? Do you feel it's bubbled up here, or is there something really interesting that you're dealing with on your campus that's worth discussing? Because next we're going to start talking about, okay, what are some things we can do about it? How do we solve for some of them? But do you feel that all the main challenges are up there to the student journey?
Something that I see that's really interesting is that, thank you. Something that I see that's really interesting here is that, you know, for number 5, not aware of resources available, financial aid, scholarships, mental health support, etc. That response also crosses quite a few of the span of this. And I'd be interested in hearing if anyone here has anything they'd like to elaborate on that, why they voted this in a certain way.
No, not yet. Let me take you to this question. This should be an interesting one to get some input from all of you on. Is put yourself in the shoes of the student, this traditional student. What are they looking for? What are some expectations they have of you and your college campus today? And beyond a degree, what are they looking for you to deliver at the academic institution? What's your sense of their needs, their wants, their expectations? In other words, if you were an Apple store and they were walking in, what would their expectation be? If you were Amazon and they were coming on your website, what would their expectations be? So now ask yourself, they're coming to your college, what are some expectations they're coming with?
Can I throw something out there? So one of the answers to the previous questions, which I really liked, is the idea that courses are still being designed for a traditional student. And when looking at this topic, one of the first things that I think of is experiences. So how do we translate experience, especially for a working professional who's coming in to seek a 4-year degree, into actual college credit? If it's possible, if we should, I don't know. So just...
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think people are playing off of that in some of the responses here, right? They're expecting service on demand, a custom experience, online services, availability, a hybrid option. And when I'm in trouble, how are you reaching out to me versus me having to raise my hand, right? What role does AI and other technologies play in?
So not being on a campus or an employee I can speak from a parent of 2 college students, and one of the things that I found when my daughters were in college was, even on campus, being able to find resources that they needed for their ongoing college career or whatever. So imagine not being on campus and not being able to navigate those systems and trying to find those resources that they may still need, even though they're not on campus, there's still resources that they need virtually. So being able to navigate and have that seamlessness either on campus or virtual.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
No, I understand, because when I think back to a college experience, you're in a dorm, your friends tell you where to go, you walk around campus and there's signs everywhere telling you where to go, right? Here's the health center, here's the academic advising, here's the financial aid office. But for a student who's not on campus looking around, how do you create that on a website? How do you give them that experience of immersion through that process?
I think the clear answer part, or like knowing the solutions or knowing where to go to find things, is a big part. I'm at a large public institution in California, and the reality is, like, we've merged a lot of offices, we've merged a lot of functions. So our students have always been relatively non-traditional, but now more than ever, if you need to do something, you don't know where to go at all, even before the pandemic. And I think it's because more and more of the institutions are doing cross-functionality, or I don't know what it is, but it's like it's like, oh, you have an admissions question, you don't go to admissions, you go to Welcome Center. Like and that's very common. And I think a lot of it too is trying to adapt to new populations, new needs, trying to be dynamic. And we have a lot of students that are tech savvy, and then we have a lot of students that are not. And how do you broker that kind of like making it clear for the folks that can't do it or can't find it?
Yeah, it's a dilemma for sure, because on one side, there's efficiencies being created at the institution level. How do we become more efficient? How do we reduce costs? And that leads to a set of things being designed, maybe merging of certain offices or functions or cross-training. But then if we weren't picturing the student during that design session, you could have added 4 levels of complexity or a bunch of hoops for the student to jump through without even realizing. Right? Yeah, that's very insightful. What are some of the departments you represent? Usually we ask that question right at the beginning, but what are some of the areas of the college you represent? What part of the college do you represent? IT.
We're change management.
Great. Financial aid, IT, financial aid. What part of the school do you represent?
IT, but Anna.
Okay, IT. Okay, so in some cases, you're able to drive strategy right out of your office, but in some cases, it's coming from around you, and you're just kind of having to respond and adapt to that process. Okay, so some of you have already started to vote on this. Which of these, so as you look at this, use the green stickies if you don't mind, and help us identify, in your opinion, what are the outcomes a new traditional student's looking for? And we'll start to see which ones many of you agree on. I'll give you a minute to do that. This one caught my attention actually. Number 8. Determine when I'm in trouble and reach out to me. What are some thoughts or ideas you may have on that? Or what's the challenge? Well, what are a couple of examples of challenges a student could be running into when something like this could trigger? Is it like when I'm about to fail a class, are you thinking? Or are you thinking more of a financial aid side of the house?
A class, making sure they're still meeting their satisfactory academic progress, make sure they don't go too low where maybe next year they won't be eligible for anything. So to be able to help them, be sure like, hey, maybe go to counseling or change your classes.
And you're trying, in the example you gave, you would hope that technology could look for certain trends and send out an alert saying, hey, based on these 4 criteria, we just want to draw your attention to something, versus a human having to do it when I'm already on academic probation. All right, great.
I think it could be something about maybe anxiety or mental health related, because there's so many different classes, so many different responsibilities, especially when we're talking about the new traditional students who are doing work outside, and there's just too much going on. A pulse check or something could be a great way to, where a student will be able to say like, I'm in trouble, I am unhappy, I am stressed out, I am, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think, mental health has always been like a very important part of the student experience, but until recently, it hasn't really been receiving the attention that it really needs. We know that students learn best when they're in a
healthy emotional state. And I think moving forward, we'll see a lot of support and more intention in terms of being strategic of how to support the mental health of our students and campuses. So,
Well, let me ask you that question though, playing off of mental health for a minute. What stage is the whole mental health thing on your campuses? Is it just, we're not even talking about it? Or is it, no, there's some talking, but there's really no ideas on how to fix it? Or no, our campus has actually moved to putting some great solutions together to fix it? Or we've actually done it and we're seeing outcomes? Where do you sense your campus is in that journey?
So one of the things that I think that's the biggest challenge is right now we are trying to implement some technology solutions that will help to flag students so that advisors can reach out, right? But it involves the entire community, faculty need to be making notes, TAs, right? Also, I worry about the student. The student's receiving a ton of email communication. This is gonna get lost. So as a student, if you want to actually have that connection, somebody's reaching out and connecting with you, what does that look like? Because it can't be an email necessarily or a text, right? Because we're inundated with that, or our students are.
So the question though is, when we think of this non-traditional student, let's look at two of them that you've identified, right? One is the professional. Picture them in your mind. What's the best way for that professional to be reached out to? But then also think about what we call that 18-year-old, you know, very digitally sound, almost gamer level. How would they want that nudge to come? Any thoughts on, or should it be the same? That's the big question, right? Is it persona based or is it institution software based? Like, hey, we bought a piece of software, it does email, so that's how everyone's gonna get notified.
I definitely don't think it should ever be software based.
Yeah.
I mean, I really like the idea of the persona based, but let the student identify, right? It may be that you're a working professional, but that truly the way that you interact with the world is more like a 20-year-old gamer.
Yeah.
So
No, that makes sense. For those of you that are in the financial aid side of the house, does most of your communication with the student happen via email? It's email. Okay. Yeah, and the emails get lost, right? Because there are 7 other departments also emailing that student today at the school. Okay.
So we use emails and text messages as well.
And are the text messages automated text messages? Or?
No, we can customize the text
Wow.
messages.
And what are you sent? Are you seeing a different response from this new traditional student when they're getting emails versus when they're getting texts?
We haven't keep track, so I wouldn't be able to tell you.
So even anecdotally, even if you had to guess?
I would say text messages are better
Yeah.
responsive than just emails alone. And then also we use social media to like promote deadlines for everything. So I see when students are in social media, they're able to like get into their financial aid faster.
Oh, is that right? That's an interesting insight for the other schools here and those watching is when you cross over to social media for some of this information, you're getting higher engagement.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too, because I think a lot of the theme that's coming out of this conversation and just from what we're seeing up here, you know, having an easy way to get answers and find resources, you know, really having those important communications being right at the student's fingertips, it kind of really points to this idea of like an on-demand experience where, you know, students don't want to spend time, you know, looking for all the answers and finding all the resources and, you know, going through, you know, hundreds of different links and applications and, you know, having to use different usernames and logins and all these different hoops and different obstacles for them to get access to what they need. Because a lot of these traditional students, right, they're busy parents, they're busy working professionals, and if we're looking and comparing looking at that experience compared to their experiences with Amazon and Uber and all of these different applications, it is entirely different right now. So these are just all excellent.
So here's the question. What are some ways schools can serve this non-traditional student differently? What are some ideas you could take back to your departments from today So hopefully someone will share an idea here that you can take back to say, oh yeah, we could do that. Or what if we did this differently or that differently? What are some ways we can serve differently? Or it may be something you're already doing that you're finding very successful at your school.
I was just going to say that what Patricia had said about social media, getting better engagement from students, that could definitely be one.
Oh yeah.
So I will say, we also just instituted a new program they're called student navigators. So they're sort of like academic advisors, but we're trying to reach out, and I think that they actually call. So they communicate in multiple ways, and some people don't want a phone call, and that's fine. I completely appreciate that. But I think just being more open to that, and that's why it's interesting about the social media. But then that requires somebody on our end who's savvy
With that.
with that.
Yeah, be careful what you ask for because they'll tell you and then you have to deliver.
Right.
Right? But somebody here brought up the point of, let's say your school is able to do 3 things: phone call, text, and email. Asking the student which one they prefer. You've probably filled out a form somewhere and they've asked you, right? Would you rather prefer to be contacted via phone or email? And then you like that they only contact you that way. Yeah. The hard part of that is the institution has to be ready to deliver that way. Because if you have 1,000 students say phone call, that's a lot of phone calls that would need to be made. So
I also really like this idea of, online. So when you're on campus, navigating the space is a little bit easier maybe because you have your roommates, you have signs. The online world is so big, and if we can somehow give this student, this is sort of your need, so I'm handing you exactly where you need to log in to get specific information. So for example, ideal world, if I'm a working student and I did have something at my school where I could transform experience into college credit, that the university could identify me as such, send me that information on how to submit or start that process, for example.
that makes sense.
Yeah, and Karen, I also just wanted to circle back to what you had said earlier about the advising piece of that, and having students that are coming in with these transfer credits. Really important part of being able to advise accordingly and be able to help the student, support the student on the degree path, right, is to know what they're coming in with so that we can figure out where they want to go, and then also help navigate them there to that point. And so advisement is also really important. An advisor can really serve as that single touch point for all those other services that are happening on campus.
On point number 3, building automated and manual processes, for example, having faculty take some action, whether it's clicking a button or doing something that would let this institution know that, hey, this student's at risk. I've noticed something about their attendance, I've noticed something about their grades dropping, I've seen some behavioral change. I just want to raise the alert so someone can intervene. Is that something you feel faculty does or likes doing, or do they feel like they don't want to or wouldn't want to?
I saw you shaking your head.
Overall, I don't think so. From my experience, there are some faculty that do, but it depends on the person. If you're caring and you care about your students, you will, but we already have trouble with faculty doing their grades and submitting, other documentation. So this might be a little harder to get from them. It is a great idea. I love it. But
Yeah, because like with any system, right, garbage in, garbage out, if you could build it, but if only, let's say 20% of the faculty are using it, then you've got a whole student population who you think is doing great, but may not be because they're missing information.
But I'd say at least those 20% of students are being looked at and being at least observed. Whereas if you combine it with an automated process, you might be able to at least catch some other references and other issues with the other 80% along with the 20%.
How close do some of you feel we are to be able to have those kinds of technology acting in a nudge kind of environment? Do you feel are you already looking at some of it? Has it already been presented to you? Do you feel we're 5-10 years away? Or do you feel the technology's out there, it's just your school may not know about it, that's using AI and providing tools that can bubble up this kind of insight? Because one thing I'm taking away so far from our session is mental health, student mental health is a big thing. And it's concerning all of you, and there doesn't seem to be a solution for it yet. That's really gonna take it outside of one person's hand or a second person's hand. Hey, Joe. Yeah. I'm trying to see if there's stuff already out there that schools are talking about. If not,
So that's what we use a product, an early alert system essentially. But I'm wondering if what they're measuring is the problem. So they're onboarding courses very slowly and big courses that students tend to struggle with. And we just added all of our math, like Math 002, Math 101s, to this early alert system. And the faculty are pretty engaged, they are responding, advisors are reaching out, and they found that their DFW rates did not change. Now, maybe that's because you're measuring the wrong thing. If part of this intent is to help the student with mental, because they're struggling with whatever it is, whether it's the content of the course or whether it's a mental health struggle, you need to be looking at other, right, measuring something else.
and that's the question, right? What are the things? Again, we're putting ourselves back with this new traditional student. What are the things that would indicate to us or to this group that something's wrong? Or hey, there's something to be concerned about. What are some behaviors, let's say, that you could identify that should raise at least a yellow flag? Any thoughts? Anyone have any ideas on behaviors you could be looking for?
Definitely not attending courses.
Yeah, so attendance could be one of them.
I was gonna throw out one more.
Yep.
As an advisor, I had a student once who had a ton of incompletes, but because there was no way in the system for people who had access, they didn't realize that. That was a huge flag. The student just, because as the faculty, they hand them out, they weren't aware that the student had 10 others.
So because of the lack of insight across the platform, I as a professor may have only seen one incomplete when there were many more that could have triggered. So that's where the software would have had to know and be following the student. So, okay, so attendance, completion of courses, anything else come to mind that could be kind of an early indicator? Anything about maybe their social media behavior?
Quiet or not engaged in the classroom.
So classroom engagement level, right? Subjective, because the professor would have to compare to, oh wow, that student, Patrick, was super engaged at the beginning, but something's changed. But that's interesting. Anything else anyone can think of? Patrick?
I'm wondering whether or not, at least for the freshmen, resident assistants might be able to at least identify some challenges, and if a student is not even leaving their dorm, whether or not there might be some indication there.
Yeah, seclusion, right? If a student, so did everyone hear that? An RA being able to input data would be really insightful. I wonder what role peer feedback has to do with it, because students usually know about each other's situation before anybody else. So a way to just say, hey, I'm concerned for my friend. Could that, and then the algorithm's looking at all that data to then do some alerting. What impact would that have on the services that are available, right? Very interesting. Very interesting.
And I had a follow-up.
Yeah, please.
What would be some things you would see at a community college for community college students? Because we don't have an RA, so how, we don't see them on campus all day, every day. So how would we move?
Good question. One of the, I don't know who mentioned it, somebody mentioned, is there a tool or a way for a student to just indicate how they're feeling, right? There's new social apps now where it's like, hey, it's an emoji world, right?
Yeah.
So am I having a good day, a bad day, is it a happy day, is it a rainy day? How can even my behavior in social media send a signal? Because you're right, a commuter campus, there's less engagement. Even between the students, there's less engagement. So what could be a trigger to pull that out?
I know something that some companies are doing now. They're using artificial intelligence and like cognitive services to look at reviews of what's happening, and they can actually identify patterns in the language for disgruntled or upset customers. And then it triggers the alerts for someone to actually reach out to that individual person. So that technology does exist in that context. So I'm kind of wondering, is there a way that like emails can be scanned, or messages, or something that can like sense distress in a student's messages? I mean, I'm not sure if that's possible in that context, but it'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, the technology exists, it's being used. The question we have to ask when we go back to our campuses, right, and we're having our conversations is this mental health thing, or even this new student and the different ways we want to serve them, just something we're talking about, or is it something that we really need to go after? Because the solutions are out there. One example that Matt mentioned was, many of you have probably used telehealth to some extent, right? A mobile phone, you say, I've got an issue with this, you submit, and moments later, it says, hey, in 2 hours or 20 minutes, someone's gonna call you, and you call and you have a real conversation. What does a tool like that, how could it be beneficial versus me saying, oh, I've got to schedule an appointment on a website to go see an advisor, and it may be 2 to 3 or 4 weeks out. What about my need right now?
There is one thing I wanted to add about mental health. A lot of students they've seen experience from other students who went to their colleges and talked about mental health and anxiety, and they've been met with not always a positive response, right? They've met with repercussions. They've met with colleges saying that, oh, maybe you should take a semester off because colleges are trying to be accountable. Like, they're accountable for certain actions that students take, and students are afraid. You can see it on social media, and just talking to students, so they don't want to tell their colleges that we're, anxiety, we're going through depression, we're going through suicidal thoughts, whatever it may be, and that feeling, should be something we should address from the university side.
Yeah, it's almost like you're touching. It's almost like you're touching on this idea. It's like trusting the student when they say something. It's simple, sounds simple, but in practice it can be overlooked, right? Because a lot of people on campuses, there are so many pressures and so many things going on, so many ways to be accountable. So it almost makes me wonder, how can we serve our faculty better and our staff better to be able to take care of the students? And in all of these, pattern that I'm seeing, it seems like this idea of just being compassionate, compassionate and just listening and understanding is probably like a pretty good first step.
A lot of what you're talking about here, if you look at the list of recommendations you have for each other of what we could do differently, it comes back to you're really student-centric. These are all very student-centric answers. There's very little institution stuff here. And I think one of the things we find with some of the clients we work with is all the new, great, innovative stuff is happening when you flip from an institution-centric mindset of what is the institution, what policies, what procedures, how do we protect this, how do we stay out of jail, so to speak, and you start looking at it from the student's perspective, and then all the answers start to bubble up. I mean, look, just with this small group of people here, some ideas are starting to bubble up of solutions that can happen for the student. Imagine if everyone on campus started to talk this way, and what ideas would bubble up, and what kind of engagement could lead from that. But just looking at the first one, understand student preferences, ask the student how they would like to be interacted with, and then provide the solution. Build automation, create more availability, pay attention to the student's virtual experience, and more personalized, just-in-time, action-oriented notifications. You're describing what the traditional student today gets everywhere else. In all the other places they shop, in all the other experiences they have, they're getting a lot of this already. And so you're rightfully saying that's the expectation they have for their higher ed experience. The question is, how do we get them to that experience? It begins with these conversations that hopefully you'll take back to your schools and get the conversation going.
I was going to say, I love what Gabrielle was talking about, clicking a button, this is how I feel today. It made me think of we all have the health quest stuff that we have to do, and there's one that's how do you be mindful. And so every day you click the button, the smiley, which button, and how awesome that would be to have a relatively simple way to capture that for that student whenever they log into whatever system it is that they use a lot because they're in this category or in this type of student.
Yeah, especially if the student knows that there's some benefit to them for doing that, versus just informing the big system of what's going on. But yeah, how can we incentivize them, so to speak, to do that? Because what can they get out of that process? Any closing thoughts from everyone? We do this thing called post mingle. Yeah, right. We'll walk over to you. Where we've got 10 more minutes or so. It's just a chance for all of you to interact with each other, get to know each other, find out what campuses you're from. Can you continue the discussion while some music plays? But if you have any closing thoughts, please do share them with us.
It's just one thing. This is really important to me, mental health, and I think that it'll take everyone to address something like this. It's not going to be one particular department in a university, not one mental health area, whatever it may be. I think everyone needs to be aware of how students are feeling, how anyone's feeling, really. Faculty, advisors, what kind of work is being put out there, what kind of expectations are being expected from students. I think it takes a whole community to address something like this, and not just one particular department.
Yeah,
just a thought.
No, that's a great point. It came up in our previous session, the notion that yes, we've talked about students all this session, right? And that's an important session, but what about staff, right? You guys are more overloaded now. There's less people doing the work, so you're having to do 2 and 3 people's jobs. So your mental health, your fatigue factor, your burnout, that's going to have an impact on the student experience. So how do you take care of both sides? Faculty, right? Their whole world had to change and how they have to deliver their product. So everyone's going through it right now. Any closing thoughts from you, Karen, before we sign off?
No, I'm so excited that I got to be a part of this conversation because I'm going to take all this back with me and hopefully keep talking about it.
Yeah, one of the things Matt says, and that's what I hope all of you will do. One of the things Matt says is, you don't have to be the president of a campus or the chancellor of a system to start being a change agent. If some of these topics are important to you, sometimes you'll hear your campus talk about, we should upgrade our student system, we should upgrade software, we should do, Salesforce, and those are all great things. But sometimes these conversations need to be brought up as part of that so that you don't just design another system that didn't factor in this insight you have about this new student. Mental health is the big thing. So where does that fit into the tech strategy for those within the IT shops? And how do you bubble that up in the conversations when it's being designed, right? And student services, even financial aid, you deal with students. The insight you get about a student when you're interacting with them, other departments probably don't experience, right? So how do you take that and make it part of a larger conversation? Well, thanks for being part of today's conversation.
Yes, we also want to say a special thank you to Promethean for allowing us to use this panel today. It's an interactive tool that we use also in our own offices. And
just so you know, this isn't by far even close to my favorite part of Promethean. My favorite part of Promethean is about to come up here. It's this.
Oh, you gotta use the tool.
Sorry, let me give you the tool. I live in our office on Promethean. It's awesome. So put it in your budget somehow and get it in your offices, because this becomes a great place to ideate, innovate. I mean, if you want to come play with it, come play with it. You'll have a lot of fun. For the next 5-7 minutes or so, it's post-mingle time. Just hang out, meet some of the people here.
We also have a 3:30.
Yes, we also have a 3:30